How are you guys all doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, bringing you guys a good show today filled with a lot of good, interesting stories to talk about surrounding the NFL and all the storylines. As you all know, this week is free agency week or the start of the new league year, so there's a lot of stuff coming in around that, and I got a few stories with you guys planned here today. The first one being around Sauce Gardner and Mecole Hardman. A few weeks ago, I talked about Mecole Hardman on the Pivot podcast and his comments, harsh criticism towards the Jets. Now, Sauce Gardner was on the Pivot podcast and he was able to respond. I'll get into that and what he said towards Mecole Hardman. Later on, I have a story on the different rule changes and new league proposals from these teams in the NFL on potential rule changes that they would like to see. I picked out a few from the article I read, so I wanted to bring that to you guys and give you guys my thoughts on them. Then later in the show, I'll talk about Calvin Ridley and his new big deal that he signed with the Tennessee Titans, staying in the AFC North and what that could mean for the Tennessee Titans that have revamped a lot and have made their offense look a lot more different heading into next season as it has compared to in the past. Before I wrap it all up with the last segment on Dak's brother, giving some comments and some praise to the Eagles front office, I'll let you guys know what he said, what it could mean for the Cowboys, and how they look at Dak Prescott, and maybe how he could be right in a sense or not. So stick around for that conversation towards the end. A lot of good topics to talk about today. And before I get into the first one, as always, I want to remind you guys, if you have any comments, any questions during the live show on any of the topic segments, to please use the tip and donations link running across the bottom of the screen. The link is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. As always, if you have any questions, use that link. It makes it easier for me to read them out while I'm on the air. It makes it more of a conversation, discussion type of show. I think that's more fun in my opinion. And on top of that, it's a big help if you're able to use that link and donate, not only for this show, but for all the shows across the network. And it's greatly appreciated from all of us here at GSMC if you guys are able to do that. And on top of that, always just remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. I personally greatly appreciate that. But in saying that, I can move on to the first topic, the chip shot story. Talking about Sauce Gardner and Mecole Hardman. That sort of back and forth, if you want to call it, between Hardman, who started this whole topic of conversation back when he was on the Pivot podcast with Ryan Clark, Fred Taylor, Channing Crowder. And, they interviewed him about the Super Bowl and all that stuff that went into it the whole season. And he had some interesting comments to say about the Jets because he was originally on the Jets there to start last season. Then he got traded back to the Kansas City Chiefs. And, I don't have the quotes I used back then in front of me, but he basically said that it was on offense. It wasn't really organized with their offense. It was mostly, they didn't have a plan or they didn't know what to do. It was all Aaron Rodgers' show. He was going to try and figure it out for them, essentially. And on top of that, he had issues with him not playing. The Jets trying to play an undrafted rookie ahead of him. He didn't like that. Or the idea that, they were trying to tell him about how to win or what was best for a team. And he went on to say, they can't really do that, or their argument doesn't validate because he's been on Super Bowl winning teams. Him saying they're not going to tell me about how to win. So all of that kind of stemmed from there. Now recently, on the latest edition of the Pivot podcast, Sauce Gardner went on there. They interviewed him, and this topic was brought up as well. And he addressed it pretty directly in the interview with the guys there. And one of the first things he mentioned was that Hardman was basically ungrateful for his time with the Jets. It might not have seen or appeared as how Mecole Hardman put it in his words. And some of the quotes that he said were, if you really know what it takes to win, you're going to make sure you let the team know the reason he couldn't do it is because he never earned his stripes. he came to the facility and thought he had it made for him. That's one thing he said. Later on in the show, he kept on going and said, if you know what it takes to win, you're not going to go into practice and drop hella punts and then have excuses as to why you're dropping them. You're not going to go into a special teams meeting and get cussed out by the special teams coordinator. Giving us a little bit of more of an insight than Mecole Hardman did, in all honesty, about what was going on behind the scenes and why that situation kind of fell out. You know, when it was announced that Mecole Hardman was signing with the Jets last year, I thought that was going to be great for them. They signed Allen Lazard. They were adding Mecole Hardman to Garrett Wilson, and I thought, you got your deep threat with Mecole Hardman. You got your number one all-around wide receiver with Garrett Wilson, and Allen Lazard is there as more of a slot, reliable target, familiar with Aaron Rodgers. And the whole talk of last offseason, it seemed like it was all around Aaron Rodgers, the Jets, and Nathaniel Hackett going back to the Jets. It has to be Aaron Rodgers, who their quarterback is going to be. It turned out that people were right. It was going to be Aaron Rodgers. And everyone was painting this New York Jets team ready to contend for a Super Bowl. You know, their defense was young and very exciting with some of the pieces that they had. So how could they not be ready to compete in a division with the Bills that was obviously going to be their toughest competition, but the Patriots weren't looking so hot. The Dolphins weren't really what they are right now. And then you have them on top of that. And, you know, everyone gave them a good chance to fight for the division, maybe even be a Super Bowl contender. But you have the Aaron Rodgers injury, then everything just really is just destroyed after that. Once Aaron Rodgers goes down, there's a lot of bad performances leading to outbreaks with Mecole Hardman and stuff like that. All the frustration boils over, and then Mecole Hardman leaves. You get all the quotes around it, and then now you kind of have both sides of the story with Mecole Hardman defending himself and his decision, and Sauce Gardner defending the Jets and really standing up for the team. And another sentiment Sauce Gardner applied to this whole situation was that he felt that it was just basically unnecessary for Mecole Hardman to say these sort of things about the Jets, because they traded him back to a team that he wanted to go to. That wasn't a requirement. They didn't have to trade him back to the Chiefs or have to be treating him in a right way where they give him back to the Chiefs and think that that's fine. They could have traded him away to any team and, you know, kind of screwed him in a bit by not having him benefit. But they were decent enough to trade him back to a team he was familiar with. He goes on to win the Super Bowl. And now you have a chance to analyze both things. And could there be some truth to both sides? I think that's kind of where the final verdict is that I've fallen on, because I don't think Mecole Hardman is wrong in saying that, you know, this was all Aaron Rodgers' show, and whatever the plan fell out, and whenever this team didn't really know what to make of a situation or what to do, it didn't matter because Aaron Rodgers was there to kind of bail everybody out of it. I think that is true, and I think it was painted like that a lot last season with the narrative around the Jets. Just because Aaron Rodgers went there, everyone thought this team was ready to win a Super Bowl. This team was ready to make that huge next step, and then, you know, that wasn't the case at all. They weren't anywhere close. There were some stories that broke out that Aaron Rodgers really wasn't happy with the offensive line. The offensive line was going to be a real problem, and it turned out to be that. You know, just in preseason, it didn't look right. In training camp, it didn't look right with all the reports that came out. Then Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, and if my memory serves me right, I think he was rolling out, trying to avoid pressure when he ruptured his Achilles. That obviously comes from not enough time, having to create more time. And, you know, I think from that aspect, Sauce Gardner or not, Mecole Hardman's comments made sense, because that is true. They just relied a lot on Aaron Rodgers to bail them out, and that proved to be their detriment because he got hurt, and then they didn't really have a game plan to implement once Aaron Rodgers wasn't there. I think everybody hyped it up a little bit too much last year with Aaron Rodgers. The quarterback is, you could argue, the hardest position in a lot of sports compared to other sports, but football is the ultimate team sport. So you need to have everything else be really good to even be able to compete with all the other good teams. I think the Jets failed to do that. But also looking at it from Sauce's point of view, at the same time, yes, I agree that it was unnecessary, and he kind of let us in on what kind of happened in team meetings when special teams coordinators weren't happy with Mecole Hardman. He was really not performing when he said he was dropping punts and such things like that, kind of letting us in on, Mecole Hardman wasn't holding his end of the deal also, so why should he feel like he should start regardless of him being in successful situations before? That part of it I do agree with. I think him saying he didn't earn his stripes is a good, valid point, just based on what he's saying, if it is true. So both of them make good points. And at the end of the day, with this whole situation, it makes, I think, the Jets almost look worse than either of these guys, because it just looks dysfunctional, is what I'm really trying to get at. It looks like the Jets were painted as this team that was ready to perform, ready to compete for the division in playoffs and things like that, but they couldn't be further from that, at least last season, just based on this argument going on from former teammates, the arguments behind the scenes. And I know a lot of teams have arguments and disagreements when they're in a season and things get heated and things aren't going your way, but when the way this has extended and the way this has just carried on, I think it says more about the Jets and how they really weren't ready at all last year, just because they got Aaron Rodgers, to compete whatsoever, compared to other organizations that keep their, as they say, dirty laundry in-house. They don't air their dirty laundry. I think that's the way that good organizations, balanced organizations, successful organizations go about their business. And whenever you see stories like this, to me, it says more about the team than the individuals and how they feel. That's just how I see it. And at the end of the day, too, now you head into this year, they're trying to get past that situation of what Mecole Hardman say, and the Jets are trying to move past that and kind of disprove that. They have addressed it a little bit with trading for the Ravens offensive tackle Morgan Moses, trying to help him out in that way. Aaron Rodgers is going to come back. I don't think he's going to take the spot as the vice president. I know there's been stories about that. If that happens, then I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows anything about football if that happens. But I don't believe those rumors. He's going to be there, and I think now this year is going to be we're going to get a real taste of what it could be with Aaron Rodgers, because last year I think they just overblew it a little bit too much. Now this year they learned from their lessons in last year with how bad they performed, no real game plan to implement regardless if Aaron Rodgers was there. Now, hopefully they've learned that lesson, and we're going to get a good evaluation of where they are now after all these little issues that really don't mean much other than what you put out there on the field. So it was interesting to see Sauce respond to it and go a little bit further by airing out some of the stuff that happened behind closed doors. But, regardless, everyone's going to move past it. We're going to move past it in this show. It was just something interesting that I saw that he brought it up. But moving on with the show, I'm going to send it to our first break right now. And after the break, we're going to dive into some of the rule change proposals that some of the NFL teams proposed recently, just in the offseason before their annual league meeting later this month in March. And I'm going to get into all that. I picked out some of the best ones that I found the most interesting, as well as the story on Calvin Ridley signing with the Titans and the story on Dak Prescott's brother praising the Eagles front office. So find out more about all that stuff after the break on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.